Hello and welcome to everyone who have joined us for this interview, which is part of the Cambridge Judge Business School video series, CJBS Perspectives, Leadership in Unprecedented Times. We sincerely appreciate you for joining us today. By way of a quick introduction, my name is David Reiner. I'm a political scientist and university senior lecturer in technology policy here at Cambridge Judge Business School. I'm also assistant director of the Energy Policy Research Group, where I work on understanding public and stakeholder views of various low-carbon technology options and the associated social license to operate for firms related to energy and the environment. In particular, I've supervised a number of PhD students working on everything from palm oil, global ethanol, value chains, and low-carbon energy in the Gulf. And most recently, I've been collaborating with some Finnish colleagues on carbon-neutral fuels. So I'm particularly pleased to welcome today's guest. We're hugely honored to be joined today by Karl Feilder, founder, CEO, and chairman of Neutral Fuels. For the past nearly 10 years, Karl has pioneered commercial biofuel production in the Middle East, and impressively, today is the largest group of cleantech fuel facilities in the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, and something we don't often think of in the context of the Gulf. So welcome, Karl. Thank you for joining us on behalf of Cambridge Judge Business School. We're absolutely thrilled to be interviewing you for this video series.
Thanks, Peter. Very, very nice to be here. Thank you.
Great. So just to get our interview started, can you please share with us a bit about yourself, the beginnings of your passion for sustainable energy, and how this culminated in setting up Neutral Fuels?
Well, thank you. I'm originally an engineer. My first degree is in engineering, but I'm one of those scary engineers who went back to school and did an MBA. So I'm both a detail junkie from an engineering perspective, and I can also argue with the best of the accountants out there. These are a good skill set when it comes to moving halfway around the world to do something impossible. So I got together a team in 2006, the end of 2006. Having had a pretty successful career in the IT industry, I think my track record at that stage was sold 4 companies, taken 2 public, and I decided that really I needed to spend the rest of my career trying to save the planet. I've got 3 young kids. I looked at each of their 3 beautiful smiles and decided that I was going to be handing them a pretty horrible environment if we didn't do something about it. My wife said to me, well, I think you really need to be just focused on saving the planet. I said to her, darling, that's rather a large task, and indeed anybody that's doing that has never made any money at it. And she said, if you think you're so bloody clever, you work out how to make money and save the planet. So she really set me the challenge, and that's been the way of my life ever since the end of 2006. We've been working on large projects. I think we're at 40-something countries now that we've been operating. And I did a project for McDonald's starting in 2010 that looked at their carbon footprint across 37 countries. And one of the things that we discovered in that project was that they could be self-sufficient in fuel in their supply chain if only they could work out how to recycle their cooking oil into a biofuel. And I went back to them and said, well, maybe we can do something with this. And they said, well, the hardest market for you to do that in has got to be the United Arab Emirates. So if you can prove to us that it works there, then we'll partner with you in other countries as well. I went to the Dubai government and said, I think you really need a biofuels industry here. I'd like the fact that the local people here have got a great sense of humor, because they just laughed. They thought, you've got to be mad. You want to come to the fossil fuel capital of the world and you want to do something that isn't fossil fuels. And I said, yeah, I really do. That was, gosh, that was a long time ago now, more than 10 years ago. And they said, well, and once they'd stopped laughing, well, if you're really serious, we'll help you. And Dubai Economic Department, which is our equivalent of the local, effectively the Ministry of Economy, they said, well, explain to us exactly how this is going to work, and we will go and get you special permission, because in the Middle East, most of the Middle East countries, you can't just get a license to operate a business. You have to have it in a specific category. So in the UAE, I think there are a few thousand categories of licenses you can have, and biofuel was not one of them. So we actually had to get a new license created, a new license type created for something that didn't exist. And that meant explaining to people who didn't know anything about biofuels what they are and indeed why they should grant us. So that took quite a long time. I drank a lot of coffee. I met a lot of great people, and they today are still our best supporters. I think it works extremely well in this type of environment if you ask them for your support and you never ask them for any money. That seemed to be a fairly good way of making this work. I said, I'll put this thing together. I'll make Dubai and the UAE look good. I will do this properly. We will look to the rest of the world like we're really serious about sustainability, which we are now. And I'm not going to ask you for any money to do it. And they supported us in our first endeavor. McDonald's has been a superb partner all the way through. McDonald's has an extensive supply chain, not just McDonald's, but it extends to Del Monte and Nestle and a bunch of other really great companies. So we were able to partner with them as well. And yeah, we've been producing here now this is going to be our 10th year of production. We've got 3 factories at the moment. We're about to open another one in about a month's time. That will be our 4th. And we're hoping to get to 10 by the end of 2021. So fairly aggressive growth plans.
No, great, thank you. I mean, can you say, just maybe elaborate a little bit more about what Neutral Fuels does? You know, what is what is your main business?
Well, I've decided, I think I was an entrepreneur from birth. It just took me a long time to work that out. I think for many people it takes a long time to work out why they're not very happy with everything and why they wake up every single morning saying, why is that like that? Why can't we do it better? I'm not just a contrarian, but I do look at the world and say, I think I could probably do that better. The challenge with most entrepreneurs is then focusing on something and deciding you're going to do one thing rather than try and fix the entire everything. So whilst the Neutral Group, which is the parent company I put together, is involved in many different areas of sustainability, Neutral Fuels has become my prime focus over the last 5 years. And Neutral Fuels challenges the business model and the technology of the biofuels industry worldwide. I think now, after 10 years of profitable growth, where every single month we've been profitable since month 11, I think we're probably close to proving our point. But the world biofuels industry, in my mind, is messed up. It's fundamentally broken. I don't know quite how long it has taken. I think 17 years for the European Union to realize that stimulating the demand for biofuels in Europe has caused mass deforestation in other countries. And therefore, there must be some sort of mismatch there between trying to do green on one hand and doing absolutely ungreen on the other hand. So I thought that was wrong. I also thought that the way that biofuels have been produced, which is to assume the same demand and supply model as the fossil fuel industry, I thought that was fundamentally wrong as well. Essentially, fossil fuels only exist in a few countries of the world, and the demand for the output, the converted product, is in every country of the world. Whereas with renewable fuels, the supply of the raw materials is present everywhere where there are human beings, and the demand for those finished goods are in the same place in wherever human beings are. So why build a huge refinery on the coast, which is what we did with fossil fuels? Why build a few huge refineries? Why not build lots of smaller refineries close to where both the demand and the supply are? So we disintermediated the supply side of the business model, and we buy directly from producers of waste oil, and we sell directly to the consumers of biofuel. So we've disintermediated both sides of our supply chain. That turns out to be a major benefit because it means we can operate without any government subsidy. So all biofuels around the world, apart from where we are subsidized. So the government decides they're going to subsidize with a carbon tax or a carbon credit or a VAT credit or some sort of politically manipulated taxation, because on the supply of the raw materials side, there are too many middlemen, And on the demand side of the finished fuel, there are distributors and retailers and resellers and too many middlemen. If you have a smaller business unit that's at city scale, and you can source your raw materials from the city and sell directly to the city, you don't need all those middlemen. And therefore, you don't need the subsidies in the meantime, because you can take those margins from the middlemen and turn them into your profit margin.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, I mean, I guess we also want to get at the question of inspiration. So, for those unfamiliar with the neutral fuel story, can you say a bit more about, well, the process of converting this waste cooking oil into biofuel?
Yes, I mean,
and also, where, this is, where did this idea come from? My colleague Jagdeep Prabhu talks about jugad, which is, this idea of frugal innovation. So, how did this?
Well, the idea of the business model comes from that entrepreneurial zeal to always look at things and try and do them better, coupled with being an engineer, where I always want to just dissect everything into individual steps and look at how to more efficiently improve them. Couple an engineering mind with a business brain, and you end up trying to re-engineer business strategies, and that's effectively where the business model came from. And then we looked at the chemistry, and just to go into that a little bit, we take what are called triglyceride oils, but this to you and me is cooking oils, and we break the triglycerides down into monoglycerides and then form them into methyl esters using a catalyst in a methanol environment. Now that is the chemistry of what we're doing, but the business side of the chemistry, it turns out that if you build a huge refinery on the coast and you ship in whatever oil raw materials you can get from around the world, as most of the biofuels industry is, it buys oil from the waste industry, from tallow, from the beef production industry, it has rendered chickens, it has palm oil from Malaysia and Indonesia, and they all arrive at the factory, and the factory then has to work out how to process a very mixed bunch of raw materials. We took a decision that we were going to source directly from the restaurants and do a continuous batch manufacturing process. So each one of our batches is completely different, but we can optimize the chemistry because we know exactly what's going into each batch. It's not mixed at source. It is that classic thing about waste recycling in that we segregate at source. We segregate our oils at source. So we've got a batch coming in that we know is mostly sunflower. We have a batch coming in that's mostly soy. And we never process animal fats because they produce yucky biofuel. And so we're able to optimize our chemistry. So most biofuels facilities operate at about a 75% conversion efficiency. Last year we averaged 93%, and we're trying to get that up to 94% this year. That conversion efficiency also adds profit to the process. So we looked at how do other people do it, assume that they're making some mistakes, and do it all differently. So we've applied that same dissect, analyze, and rework to our biofuels production process. And that now means that we've got some unique IP as to how we do it. And that's why we've been able to go from 1 factory to 3 factories in 1 year, and why I'm hoping that we can get up to 10 by the end of next year.
Great growth trajectory there. So, you've been operating, as you were saying, I think nearly 10 years, right, in terms of making biofuel from waste cooking oil. And you're engaging with McDonald's and other large corporates. Can you discern any effect this is having, say, on the palm oil industry, which we talked about earlier in the context of Europe supporting this kind of disastrous logging of rainforests and so on?
The answer is yes, but probably not in the way you might expect. So I don't think our use of some palm oil in our production process is making any real difference at the rainforest end, simply because the decisions of KFC or McDonald's to change from palm oil to soft seed oils, those are done at a corporate level. However, what we've been able to do with our business model, and indeed because I spent so long in the IT industry, we collect the cooking oil using an app that actually registers where the oil comes from, which restaurant, who's signing off to say that they've delivered that quantity of oil. And because we're doing batch production, we analyze every batch. So we have created a portal that shows the restaurant owners the quality of that oil, that waste oil coming to us. And for certainly McDonald's, we've got more than 8 years for each restaurant in their footprint, showing them what the quality of that oil was. Now, the interesting thing from that is it allows them to optimize when they change the cooking oil in a way that they haven't ever had before, because they've never had the chemical analysis data. You can't really do a titration in the restaurant. You have to have a proper lab in order to be able to do that. So giving them that information. Now, while we've been running this program, McDonald's in the UAE has actually changed their oil 4 times. They've gone from a palmoline base, which is a liquid version of palm oil, right the way through different blends, till now we're on what they call the European mix, which is mostly sunflower and some rapeseed oil and no palm. And what we've been able to do is to show them the impact on the cooking quality of the oils as they've been changing that oil. And they've never, anywhere in the world, for one of the world's largest chains, they've never had that quantity and quality of data before. So this is informing their decision in other markets. So when people go to them and say, well, in the lab, we fried a few French fries in palm and we fried a few French fries in soy, or we fried it in sunflower, these were the impacts. We're able to give them years worth of data. So as they move into other markets that are going to go to these better oils, and they're better because they've got lower trans fat, they're more healthy, they last a little bit longer, so they use less oil. These are better oils in an environment that you could argue is not particularly healthy anyway. But if you're going to eat French fries, rather eat French fries that are cooked in a low trans fat or zero trans fat oil that's got less saturated fat. It's going to harden your arteries less. So we've been, I believe, a really useful input of data into a change process that's going on around the world. We've given them the confidence to change those oils.
No, that's a great. It's a great case on the role of evidence and traceability and so on. So it's wonderful example. Obviously you've spoken about McDonald's and corporates. Do you have plans to offer these biofuels in sort of more domestic or residential settings?
We've looked at the domestic market, and indeed the challenge there is how to economically collect the oil. So what we've run is, in a number of schools, we run pilot programs in schools where we've gone into the school and done an education. And of course, the great thing about our business is we've got a little bit of chemistry, we've got a little bit of geography, we've got a little bit of sustainable engineering. So we go in and educate the kids on what we do, and even to the extent of doing reactions for them and showing them how we actually make biofuel in the chemistry lab. And then we're able to say to them, and now we're going to run a program where you bring in the waste cooking oil from your kitchen, bring it to the school, we'll set up some nice clean collection areas, and then we go to the school and collect the oil from them. And that's worked extremely well. The amount of oil that we've had back from those programs has been surprising to us. And the kids, and the nag factor of having children nagging their parents that don't throw it down the drain, just bring it, let me take it to school. It's a bit messy, but you know what, it's not beyond the wit of man to do that. Certainly door-to-door collections of cooking oil is a waste of time. We've seen the UK tried to have in their recycle banks to try to have people posting bottles of oil in there, and that didn't seem to work either. So it's another thing that hasn't yet really taken off. But we've also come up with a way of solving the problem a different way. So if people do throw the oil in the drain, as long as they're not using hydrogenated oils, which stand a fairly good chance of being banned across the Middle East fairly soon. So those are the solid forms of the palm oils, or even some of the other oils. So if they're flushing liquid oils down the drain, eventually those get to the sewage works. And we've been able to, we've run a project for more than 2 years that allows us to take that off of the sewage works and actually recycle it from there directly into biofuel. And that is quite a complicated process because the oils themselves start to break down and they become a lot more acidic. And so what we took was an enzyme out of a fungus called Aspergillus. And working with one of the leading enzyme manufacturers, we came up with a process for actually using enzymes at ambient temperature to convert these highly acidic oils directly into biodiesel. And the enzyme company had done this at a lab scale. They were able to do it in 100 milliliters at a time. And their results were about a 24-hour reaction time, and they were getting around 70% yield. We took that and spent a few years working on it, and we've turned it into a 4-hour reaction time with a 92% yield. And for us, that means it's commercially viable. So sometime next year, we're hoping to get our first pilot program going of actually building a biofuels processing unit directly onto a sewage plant. And that will then give us access to the oil that does get flushed and comes up. And indeed, lots of other oils end up in the sewage pathway as well, not least the stuff that you eat that then obviously flows through. So being able to convert that into biofuels gives us a massive resource of raw materials. And as long as people keep eating fried foods, we will be able to keep producing biofuel.
I think you're probably safe in, in that regard. You talked about your in the origins of the your story. You talked about working with the government, but can you say a bit more about the challenges and maybe some of the opportunities of operating a clean tech business in the Gulf? Historically,
yes,
overwhelmingly dominated by conventional oil and gas.
The simple version is it's hard. Setting up a business is hard anywhere in life, and as I said, I've set up and sold a lot of businesses over the years, and I guess I was up for probably the challenge in my life moving here. We moved here as a family in 2009, and that was at a pretty rough time for the local economy. The global financial crisis had also hit hard on Dubai, which had gone through an amazing growth just before that. And there was a real restructuring going on. And sadly, in 2006, we had Inconvenient Truth. We had Marks and Spencer's No Plan B, Plan A program coming on board. So 2006 was great. 2007, everybody started at a corporate level to see that sustainability was really important. And by 2009, that had started to get to the Gulf. And they'd started to realize that this was almost a brand image problem. If you were going to be seen as having the world's highest per capita carbon footprint, and the world and the corporate world was starting to care about that, and people like the Disclosure Project were starting to ask corporates to report on the sustainability of their own operations, if you were just a dirty country with what was seen as a dirty industry, then they were seeing that as a real brand problem. And that gave us a useful in at the highest levels of government here to talk to really strategically thoughtful people. The one thing I would say, although it's hard setting up a business here and running it well, if you're prepared to put the time in, the people that I've met here, particularly in government, they're extremely long thinkers. They're long-term thinkers. The country is 49 years old, so we're still open to suggestions about how to run a country, and that's also very, very novel. Some of the things that exist and have existed for a long time in other parts of the world simply don't exist here. So that's also, as an entrepreneur, that's quite inspiring to be able to be part of the process. But sitting with people that are saying, okay, Karl, well, we think you're going to be good with this biofuels thing, but what's it going to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years? There's far less of that quarterly reporting, constant grab for growth attitude that you see in the West. And if you're planning things for that type of long term, you can really get some great support. So although it's hard, I've found no shortage of willing supporters in government, particularly if you're prepared to sit and talk and drink coffee and just generally talk things through in a nice way and not be too precious about things and not be scared of sharing knowledge, and that's been just fabulous. I've also spent a lot of time. There's a great concept here of giving back. So if you've been successful and you've done well in life, there is a general acceptance that you're going to spend at least part of your time giving back. So I spent 3 years as an adjunct lecturer at Masdar Institute in Abu Dhabi. I've spent time in the last 3 years teaching at Hull Business School, of being involved as a catalyst with some of their entrepreneurship programs. And I've been involved with some other entrepreneurial level things here. And that's almost expected. And certainly when you keep popping up in these things, the leadership of the country knows that you've understood more about what we're trying to do here. And I do see this as we building a country. I don't see this as local people and expats working in isolation. This is a joint effort to build a country. And if that country needs to have a clean future, as has clearly been identified now, we need to work together to make it cleaner. And we've got huge amounts of solar going on here. We've changed our grid mix. I believe that we're now, I think, 9% renewables at the moment, which, considering we're an oil producing country, is quite amazing. And we've got some pretty aggressive targets. And the thing about targets and policy here is, if you can get the ear of the right person, you can get policy changed really quickly.
That's great. I mean, clearly the importance of actually being seen as, engaged with at all levels is so important, and also drinking some coffee, I think, along the way, as you might have mentioned. Speaking of the longer term, you've obviously been this kind of a long-term advocate for reducing emissions, carbon emissions substantially, and I gather you've worked with the UK government, a number of other organizations to assess their carbon footprints and reduce energy spend. Looking back, just say at this past decade, what outcomes are you most pleased with? What areas do you think still need significant improvement?
Gosh, well, if I look back at when I started my journey, I have to say that I was very, very fortunate to be given an initial introduction to John Allen, who was then the CEO of DHL. And John recognized that there was a fantastic financial opportunity to actually making businesses more energy efficient. And when you're DHL, energy means mostly fuel, heating, lighting, cooling, particularly as they run along a number of ambient and chill and frozen facilities. And John's opportunity that he gave me, he said, well, you seem to make sense. I'm going to give you a chance. And I was very proud that I was able to deliver upon that chance that he gave us and gave me, to prove to DHL that we could make a global difference, and to do it with just looking at things a bit differently and to thinking a bit differently. I'm really proud of the work that we did with McDonald's. I think that there's still a lot more to do in any of these large organizations. And I don't think that any leader in any of the industries has really fully grasped yet just how far the change has got to go. I look back at this particular time we've been through together now in the last 6 months, and one of the things that comes out of the pandemic is the fact that we've maybe got the courage to challenge some of the things that we thought were sacred up until now. I've been banging my head for 13 years saying, excuse me, but we probably need to fly a bit less. And everybody said to me, no, that'll never happen. Well, we've just grounded the world's airlines, and now they're coming back. They're starting to look at the routes with slightly different eyes and saying, well, maybe we should only operate routes that are actually profitable, and maybe we should be doing things in a slightly more efficient way. I do think that there are some very stark positives coming out of the pandemic, and people questioning the way we were doing things before, not necessarily from a tree-hugging, open sandals wearing, long hair, beardy, weirdy type of way of doing things. I don't think I'm discriminatory particularly there with that, but I think that we're looking at things from a financial engineering perspective, and that is one of the things that I guess I'm most proud of, is being able to establish in one of the world's largest companies, being DHL, that sustainability was a financial efficiency way of doing things. It wasn't a green, smiley face, no numbers thing. To me, sustainability is all about numbers and 2 decimal places. It's not about feeling good. And being able to get that message adopted by one of the world's largest companies and then to pass it on to other large companies and their clients, that's been a big achievement.
So you've already mentioned the 800-pound gorilla as I sit here in our our home office. What impact do you think coronavirus has had on neutral fuels? How have you managed to sort of cope with this unique event? How have you managed, or maybe even capitalized on some of the opportunities that's been presented?
Being an entrepreneur means that you always are looking for opportunities, no matter what the situation is. And I'm almost, but not totally, I'm almost embarrassed to say that we've actually grown our business by 25% during the COVID. We were seen as a vital industry because we support the supply of the supply chain of food. We also help with waste management, which was clearly a real challenge during this time. So we were given the green light to really go for it during this time. The government, while it's done a superb job of managing the COVID infection here in the UAE, I think it recognised that there were many decisions that were made very, very quickly. But defining a list of industries that were critical to keep the whole country going and putting us on that list was a major opportunity for us, because I just looked at that and said, okay, how can we go even more? Our factory worked 24/7, continued to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Halfway through the pandemic, when people were being laid off or put onto short time or having real challenges, I actually paid our staff a bonus to say thank you for working so hard. I made sure that I was in the factories, seeing people with full PPE, basically showing them that I really did see the suffering that they were going through and the challenges and the courage that it took to actually get up and go to work every day. And our job as leaders in this was to make sure that we made the environment as safe as possible while still asking people to just carry on. It was that great old British thing you see so often as a meme of carry on, don't panic, carry on. And that's what we did. We had a few scares. We managed to get everybody tested that needed to be tested, and we've had no infection. We've had a number of people off sick with suspected cases, but there was nobody that was ill. But to come back to the sort of macroeconomic impact of this, I'm very scared that the attention that we've managed to get for sustainability over the last 2 or 3 years, which has really put it on the top of the corporate agenda, I'm scared that that's going to be lost. And in the way that I saw it being lost in 2008 and 2009. But this time I feel it's different. I do feel that we've made substantial progress in those 10 years. Not least of which, most organisations have now got a sustainability officer, and that person is at a high enough level to influence board strategy. It's not anymore a job that you give to an intern who you think is just somebody useful that's going to sing la 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 around a campfire to you. You're actually seeing that those people are strategically involved in the running of the business. And you've got a lot of investor pressure now from both actual funds or indeed indices that are monitoring where money's going, that's forcing corporate decision making. And I do think that we're in a better position now as a company. The fact that we've come through this even stronger than we went into COVID means that we're in a very good position to grow coming out of it. I know that sounds like fighting talk, but I really do think it's all about confidence. It's all about people trusting that the leaders, both of the country and of their corporations, know what they're doing. I don't think anybody wants to go back to some of the craziness that we had before, but equally don't think that anarchy is the answer to that. I don't think ripping down structures and ripping up the capitalist model is the right way to go. I think a responsible capitalism, a sustainable capitalism is the way forwards.
I agree. I mean, I think you're seeing both within organizations, the sustainability being embedded, I think, more deeply than we have seen. And I think, as somebody who who does a lot of public surveys, I think you see amongst consumers still quite a strong appetite for action on climate. And maybe this is, last place to end up is, coming at it from Cambridge University and Judge Business School, maybe asking you a little bit on to what extent, research that we do at universities, that we see done at, think tanks or nonprofits, to what extent does that play a part in the work of neutral fuels? What role might you see for business schools such as Cambridge Judge playing in your work, and the energy sector more widely?
So we have a very healthy internship program here. We've been, in fact, since we started, I think it was probably our first year we took our first intern. I think now we're at 38 or 39 interns that have been through our program. They've all, I'd say all of them, gone on to get jobs. And most of them are recent graduates who are struggling to make that bridge between academia and the working world. And we're very picky about who we choose. I won't say that there's a sort of proactive policy, but it just turns out that nearly all of them have been ladies. And most of them have been engineers, and in this part of the world, if you're a lady and you're an engineer, that means you've already had to smash through plenty of glass ceilings to get there, which means you've got some oomph. And that, unfortunately, doesn't ever come out on a CV. And if somebody wrote, "I've got lots of oomph" as the first line of their CV, I'm not quite sure what I'd do with that. But as I've been out, and I have to say in a slightly Machiavellian way, but going out and teaching in some of the universities and being involved directly with the universities has given me access to some of those students. And indeed, quite a few of them have come into our internship program because I've met them and seen them perform in their academic environments. Every single one of them has had rough edges that I've needed to knock off. And I'd like to think that after 3 to 6 months with us, some of them have been even longer, that those rough edges being knocked off has led to them being a lot more employable, and indeed having a more balanced and realistic view about what the work environment's about. In terms of actual research level work, most of what we've done research projects on have been to do with the chemistry of what we're doing rather than the business side. And on the chemical side, we found that's quite difficult and quite frustrating, in that there is a real challenge in that the universities have come to us and said, "We've got some PhD students that'd like to work with you, and they'd like to go on and explore X, Y, and Z." And we've said, well, 3 months for a book review that we can do in a week is not something that we're interested in. We want actual results. We want stuff that we can actually implement. And so we then turned it around and said, okay, these are what we would regard as PhD-worthy subjects for chemical research. And in most cases, the universities have come back and said, well, that all seems a bit quick. And we've said, well, yeah, that's how the real world operates. So there has been that's a little bit of friction between those. But on the business side, I have found it fascinating being involved on an entrepreneurship level and being able to use our own business as a case study live in the classroom. So having had the chance to do my MBA a few years ago, and I'm still in the process of trying to find a home for my own PhD. I've been writing for 12 years and researching for 12 years, my own PhD at the moment. But being able to take that as a case study into the classroom and challenging and giving them a live example, and then asking real bright, enthusiastic students, graduates even, where do you think we could go with this? And what do you think? That has challenged their thinking and been useful both to me and to them. So there is definitely a need for a better bridge between academia and industry. I'm involved on the advisory for one of the other universities, and I've said to them, guys, if you want to get a higher percentage of your graduates employed, you've got to start preparing them for the work environment, not preparing them for the academic environment. And the work environment requires people to operate in multidisciplined teams. I need people that can work together, that basically a chemical engineer and a design engineer or a graphic designer sitting with a mathematician, they need to be able to work together. And that's a talent that is quite rare. People like to go into their own little silos and stay there. And the working environment isn't like that anymore. We need the synergy and the synthesis of having those multiple disciplines all in a room to come up with real brilliance. And that's what I really look for.
Thank you, Karl. As somebody who cares deeply about interdisciplinary work, that's kind of music to my ears. And so you know, with that fascinating interview, I wanted to sincerely thank Karl Feilder for joining us. You've shared, you know, such a fascinating and many ways inspiring story on you know, the creation of neutral fuels, and you offer, you know, in many ways a source of hope and optimism at even in times of crisis. So it's been, you know, genuinely very interesting to connect with you, and we greatly appreciate your participating in CJBS Perspectives, Leadership in Unprecedented Times with Cambridge Judge Business School. I'd also add a big thank you very much, Karl. I wanted to also add a big thank you to all our alumni and other members of the CJBS community who have joined us and do continue engaging with Cambridge Judge. So thanks again.